Well, welcome to my podcast. And I'm sitting in the shade at a table not far from the castle. And my guest today is Mark Eynon, who is the director of the Newbury Spring Festival. Highclere Castle is only 6 miles from the town of Newbury. It's our nearest town in Berkshire. And I think about 42 years ago it was now, my mother-in-law, Jeanie Carnarvon, began a music festival here, and it's been such a glorious festival of music for 2 weeks every May, which I hope those who are listening to this podcast might consider coming to in future years. So welcome, Mark. Thank you for joining me.
Well, Fiona, it's lovely to be here. And of course, Highclere, I always think of as the heart of the festival, because your wonderful late mother-in-law, Jeanie, founded it, as you mentioned, in 1979, I think it was. So it's been going for 43 years. In fact, when I was appointed, over 20 years ago now, it was in the very castle with your mother there. She invited me for dinner and she stood me by the fire and she said, "Mark, we would like you to be our next director." And you know, what I'm very proud to tell you is that there's only been 2 directors since it started. John Wright, who founded it with your mother-in-law, and then I've been doing it since then. So I think it says a lot about the festival that it's hung on to its teams for a long time, and I have to say I've really enjoyed being the director for all these years. But one other point is that it's not just in Newbury, it's Newbury and a lot of the surrounding area. So really it could almost be called the Newbury and West Berkshire Festival, because we go as far as Lambourne and we go as far as Englefield in the opposite direction, and it's
Highclere, of course, is in Hampshire
Well,
anyway.
there we are. So with no support from the state, we're totally privately funded, with a real emphasis on young people, accessibility, keeping ticket prices low. We have somehow kept going all this time, and it's a lot to do with the loyalty of our audiences and of course our wonderful sponsors, who are incredibly loyal, including your good self and Lord Carnarvon, who welcome us every year to Highclere for one of our special events.
It is. I mean, it was an amazing thing that Jeanie started. I mean, from scratch, to get a whole musical festival going with such an ambitious way of starting as well was extraordinary, actually.
Well,
I just don't know how
St
she
Nicholas
did it.
Church, I think, was the key, because
Well, St Nicholas Church is in the heart of Newbury, isn't it?
Yes.
It's a beautiful old church with the most amazing acoustics, isn't it?
It's astonishing. For a lot of churches, you have to apologise that you're putting an orchestra in there. I remember when I was director of the Salisbury Festival, we had the wonderful Salisbury Cathedral, but it was designed for a cappella choirs, not for big symphony orchestras. For some serendipitous reason, St Nicholas Church, Newbury, big Tudor, very broad, a lot of wood and stone, but the acoustics are fantastic, and we have big, up to 80-player symphony orchestras in there, with a very intimate relationship to the audience, because we can seat about 600, which is very intimate for a large-scale orchestra. And when I first came to the festival, before I officially started, I was invited to John Wright's last festival, and the joy of hearing a full orchestra in that space, I'll never forget. And it's always a pleasure bringing big orchestras to this wonderful town. And we've had, you know, not only some of the BBC symphony orchestras, the City of Birmingham,
St Petersburg, I remember that.
St Petersburg, a lot of the Russian orchestras. We're really an international destination for big symphony orchestras, and when
extraordinary conductors and violinists. I mean, I look at what you're bringing to Newbury. I think, oh my God, where do I start?
Yeah.
So it is a joy. But the other thing I really like, Mark, is when you go to the smaller venues like Highclere. I love listening to chamber music, to violins and cellos.
Yes.
Where you're just sitting around the musicians.
Exactly.
It is such a joy, and After my father-in-law died, I took Geordie and his ma and Fiona Henderson. We all went to Vienna, and I had managed to organise the tickets in the hotel. But after that, in my sort of chaotic, I hadn't. But what was so extraordinary was it was November, and we just wandered out in the evening, and we just went into some of the great places where they were playing Mozart, and oh my God, it was just amazing. Just turning up, sitting down.
Yes.
It was so special. And that's what I love about some of what you bring here.
Well, as you know, we go to some amazing churches. I mean, Dowie Abbey, for instance. Let's talk about Dowie, which is quite far east of here, going back towards London, nearer to Reading. But a wonderful, wonderful building for choral music. And so there I brought some of the great choral companies, the 16, Tenebrae, a lot of the Oxbridge choirs have been there. And the acoustic there and the atmosphere of hearing great choral music there. But on a smaller scale, some of the very tiny sort of churches that we, even Sander Memorial Chapel, which is round the corner.
Do you know, I went to Sander Memorial Chapel, and I can't remember, it was a wonderful bishop. I don't think it was the current Bishop of Basingstoke, and he gave a talk on the Stanley Spencer paintings there, and perhaps it was in 2014, sometime around then, when you cleverly brought him, and it was 40 minutes. I was so mesmerised. I think I was probably in floods of tears in the chapel as you began to understand the paintings and the stories. It was so up close and personal. I just will never forget that afternoon, and some of them in the afternoons. Highclere is normally in the evening, but I think it's trying to bring the experience of music to people, which over the past few months we've obviously missed enormously.
Oh, goodness,
listening to it on the radio is fine, but it's just not
you're,
the same.
You're so
as
right.
sitting
It's about that immediate experience. So what's wonderful about this festival is its location, its venues, and being able to bring live music into a venue that is already magical and is then enhanced by that. So what I try and do is fit the right music to the right place. So if we're still talking about the very intimate venues, Sandham is, I think, only 40 people, and of course there we always try and focus on things appropriate to the First World War, which in the 14, 18 years in this century we did an awful lot there. Your wonderful Highclere, which can only seat 80 people, again, we've had things from viol consorts to leader recitals to violin, string quartets, and so on. All very, very special with that resonant acoustic. Eastwoody is another one of our very favourite venues, and it has a fantastic acoustic. It again works really, really well with choirs. So we've had by popular demand, we've had Voces 8 there many, many times. And I tend to now programme smaller vocal ensembles there and the very, very big ones at Dowie, which is obviously a sort of 400-500 seater. But Eastwoody is charming, it's very remote, it's no traffic nearby at all. I think they even use it for professional recordings as well, so it's very, very special. And of course we mustn't forget the Corn Exchange, which is of course the only purpose-built theatre that we go to. And that's in the centre of town. As its name suggests, it's developed from what would have been an old Corn Exchange, but it's now purposely fitted out theatre with a very, very good restaurant and raked seating and everything else. And we do there everything from the ballet company to musical theatre to small-scale opera,
we've listened to
jazz, folk music.
Some very good guitar concerts.
Oh, yeah.
And then Kitten and McConnell, I cried with laughter. I think we all need laughter, actually. So I just remember sitting there, and you look round because they're quite close to the bone with some of their recitals, however you want to put it. But honestly, I just saw people that they had tears running down their face. That was such a great sight.
I always try and use the Corn Exchange for slightly lighter stuff. Yeah. So we have a very, very big scale jazz programme and cabaret, and of course Kit and McConnell, and previously Kit and the Widow, appeared frequently. And in fact, I'll never forget them at the castle for a very grand sponsors evening that we organised, thanks to you, to raise funds for the festival. And I have to say, I don't know how they get away with what they say in such polite company.
Oh my God, I completely agree. I was looking at my mother-in-law and she'd asked the patron to kindly attend, and I was thinking, I was just wondering, you look around feeling slightly nervous.
But it's amazing. I mean, I was at university with Kit, so I know him very, very well. And all I can say is he's not mellowed with age. He's still as risky and racy as he ever was, if not more so.
I know. Goodness me. So it's such a wonderful mixture of music and laughter and experiences, and testing the bounds a little bit. But I just think of it as, the Newbury Spring Festival is part of the music of life. And that's what sometimes I think we've been realising how important it is. And if nothing else, the sounds of silence over the past few months, some of them perhaps quite good. We certainly have more planes back overhead today. But the other side of it is that what we do miss is the laughter and the being together. But when did music first enter your life, Mark? What do you remember that?
Yes.
Was there a time?
Yeah,
was it always there?
I think I always instinctively loved music more than anything else. And as a little boy, I was obsessed with Chopin's polonaises. I remember asking my parents to put them on the record, the old recording by Malkuzinski, when I was about 4 or 5. And unfortunately, I didn't start learning the piano until I was about 7, after begging and begging and begging my parents to get a piano. And of course, that then launched me into a real greater understanding of music. But music has always been a hobby. It's never been something that I thought I could ever be a professional pianist or academic in music. But I kept my piano and violin studies going at school. I ended up actually leading the school orchestra, which says very little because I'm still not a great violinist at all. But I knew I'd never be good enough to be a performer. And I didn't really want to study music academically. So I was lucky enough to get into Cambridge to read English. And when I was there, I did a lot of acting and a lot of involved with Cambridge theatre. And leaving Cambridge, I thought, well, what am I going to do? Am I going to be an actor? No, I'm not passionate enough to do that. Anyway, eventually, I decided that opera was going to be my thing, because that was what I really, really discovered while I was studying, just the way other people listening to David Bowie or Black Sabbath or whatever it was, I discovered Wagner and Strauss and all those huge, great operas, and worked for a while as an opera assistant stage manager and assistant to various directors, thinking that that's what I wanted to do. And I got a break. I met someone who owned a huge number of restaurants in London. He had the catering rights to the Henley Royal Regatta. And he said, Mark, I want you to create a festival for me, because he knew I was involved in opera, and I'd already programmed the singers for one of his restaurants. He created something called Spaghetti Opera in one of his restaurants there, and I filled it with all my young opera singer friends.
What fun.
And anyway, he said, I've got the site of the Henley Royal Regatta. Do you know somebody who could create a festival for me there? And I thought, God, I'd love to do that. So I said to his secretary, he's yes, Mark, it's a test. He wants to know, do you want to do it? Because I was only 25. And I said, well, actually, Michael, I think I'd like to do it. He said, great. Right, well, this was in February. The regatta's in July, and our festival is the week after. So within 3 or 4 months, I put together the first Henley Festival, and I filled it with all my young friends, and I had a young artist marquee, and I got the Philharmonia Orchestra, and we turned the floating grandstand into a big performing area, and from then on, I've been a festival director. But I did go back to my passion for opera when I worked for 3 years at the Royal Opera House, which was a fantastic experience. And from there, I ended up being director of the Covent Garden Festival. So opera has always been a very sort of special part of my musical passion. But I have to say, I love the fact that I can program and work with some of the great musicians. I mean, imagine, people who are your idols. Like, for me, someone like Dame Gwyneth Jones, who I used to sit at the feet of when I was a student watching The Ring in London. And then being able to actually invite her to come and sing, and she's now ended up as a very, very close, great friend, and we're in touch on a regular basis. She's been to all of my festivals, but also young artists. Something I want to mention is the real emphasis that we have in Newbury, with great support of the board, on giving an opportunity to youngsters. So it's not just the great musicians around the world established, but also I'm very proud of the fact that we have a very strong young artist program. So for instance, Mondays, Wednesdays and Fridays, every lunchtime in the Corn Exchange for 2 weeks, we have some of the top young musicians. Some of those are now world famous people like Benjamin Grosvenor, and let me tell you, Benjamin, I mean, he has been to the festival 4 times, and I first heard him when he was 17, and now of course he's one of the great stars. And since coming to us, he's been at the first night of the proms, he's got a recording contract with Decca. The rest is history. We had Milos Karadragic here before he was a big star, and then in 2018, as you probably know, Sheku Kanemason, the week before he played at the royal wedding of Harry and Meghan Markle, he came to play the Elgar concerto in the festival, and everyone thought he was fantastic. And then I said, well, you wait next weekend, and then and now of course he's a megastar. But it's wonderful making these connections and opportunities to young people, and that's one of the things that is very, very distressing of the current crisis, because a lot of these youngsters, they're just starting out and suddenly their careers are in crisis. So one of the things I've made a priority for next year's festival is to bring back as many as possible of the young artists that we had to put on hold for this year, and to continue this policy of working with youngsters wherever possible.
We were going to do a fundraising this year, Mozart in the Gardens,
yes.
Going back to my Mozart in Vienna. I
yes.
thought, let's bring it out, and again, let's try to do some fundraising for the Newbury Spring Festival here on a summer's day, because we did it once before when we had the Four Seasons playing down by the Etruscan temple. Plus we had singers in the Monk's Garden,
yes.
and I think we had
we had National Youth Jazz Orchestra as well, and they were all youngsters.
It was fantastic.
And it was great.
But we were running around in circles,
yeah.
so this time I thought we would just focus. And I've now put some power down by the Etruscan temple, so I thought I could then have some urns for tea, afternoon tea. Fantastic. And sandwiches, and we could just all. It's one of my most favourite views in the entire world, looking out over the Cablety Brown Park with a classical small temple behind us.
It's absolute heaven.
And I thought that's where we were going to have. Now, which Mozart?
Well, what I thought was, when we talked about this earlier, is that Mozart, when you're in the open air, you've got to be careful that the music will carry.
Yeah.
And brass and wind, as we know, works. And Mozart wrote the famous Grand Partita Serenade for 13 wind instruments. And this is what we were planning to do this year, and that we are now postponing to next year. And again,
but again, it's with youngsters.
Absolutely. And I found a young conductor at the Royal College of Music. In fact, it was very interesting. Lady Schulte, the widow of Sir George Schulte, has a very private salon in Schulte's studio, to which she invites various people to hear young musicians. And I was very, fortunate to be on the guest list one day, and I met this young conductor working at the Royal College of Music, and we were talking about Newbury and anyway, it turned out that he was passionate about the Mozart 13 Wind, and he has got together a team of young students with
Fantastic.
him conducting, and they're all on for next year. Next June. And so again, giving opportunities to youngsters, the perfect music for, and those of you who don't know the Mozart 13 Wind, that wonderful play and then film Amadeus, this is the moment where Salieri talks about Mozart's divinity, that he was inspired to write that. There's that moment in the slow movement where the oboe comes through, and this has become a big scene in Amadeus. I think is probably what's made that piece more generally known, but it is a glorious piece, and I think to have it in the open air in the divine setting of your gardens will be really amazing.
I think it'd be phenomenal, actually. And I think we can scatter people around. I mean, if it does rain, we have got the inside of the cars where we can scatter people, but I hope we can do it down there. I'm going to do a tour beforehand and then try to collect some food and tea down there, and
Fantastic.
then come back.
That's really something to look forward to.
Really nice.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
I'm
yeah.
looking forward to next year. And I know that sometimes if we have friends for weekends, I really love asking you to find me some young students from the Royal Academy, to ask them to come and play, to pay them to come and give us such pleasure.
Well, of course,
it's those first
it's not
bookings.
hard to get people that want to come to Highclere Castle, Fiona. I mean, they're always absolutely thrilled to that, and it's lovely that whenever you think of bringing artists down, you ask me to find some youngsters. But of course, the festival has its big stars. So I remember your mother-in-law saying one of her favourite experiences was when Paul Tortelier came to play at the festival. This was long before my time, and he stayed at the castle with your mother. And
it would have been at Milford Lake, actually.
At Milford
time.
Lake,
yes.
yeah. Anyway, it's a wonderful combination. But what I'm going to say is, for next year, I'm bringing back, wherever possible, the artists that were postponed from this year, but except for the orchestras, because I work with orchestras 3 or 4 years ahead, and orchestras are so booked, particularly the international ones, far ahead, that I already have the diary programmed. And I'm not going to tell you yet what it is, because we work so closely with our sponsors.
No, don't tell me. I love the surprise too. It's quite fun opening.
Also,
yes.
I want the sponsors to know before anyone else. So what I want to say is that without our loyal support of our sponsors, we would not really keep this festival going, and the sponsors are what make
Well,
it
I would
pay.
like to find some more people. Whilst Newbury hosts this international festival for 2 weeks, I think its importance lies beyond Newbury, so it'd be really nice to try to open it out. And I think with what's the challenges we've all faced in the last 2 or 3 months, perhaps it's suggesting to us we should go beyond the big cities and into the countryside and looking for the leisure and the pleasure moments that the countryside offers, rather than just London. It also then offers more alternatives for the orchestras, for the youngsters.
Absolutely right.
Playing.
Absolutely right.
That's
And
clearly a delivery for the castle. I hope it's champagne or something exciting.
but the other,
it's probably boxes of hand sanitizers.
when you talk about going out of the mainstream and outreach, it makes me also think of what we do with our education program, because it's so important reaching schools and children. And at the moment we're existing with this terrible absence of schooling for youngsters, and one of the things that we've always done as a festival, and again thanks to our sponsors, is we've taken so much into schools during the festival and before the festival, so that then the children can be invited to come as our guests to hear the same artists that they may have had a workshop with a few weeks before. And so for the lunchtime recitals, we always invite all the local schools to come as our guests. And I don't know about you, but I think that experience as a youngster of hearing live music for the first time, it can trigger a lifelong passion. It can make you think, wow, it's not just a record or something on the screen. This is actually a live thing. And I remember the first time I ever heard a human voice in a church, and I couldn't believe that a soprano could be so rich and full without a microphone or without coming over on a record. And I think that's something that is so important, that young people get a chance to experience the thrill of live music, and let's hope that comes back soon.
Well, I do as well, and I think, funnily enough, sometimes in a busy life you can say, well, I don't have time to do this, or I don't have time to do that. And funnily enough, George and I were going to a conference in Spain. I thought, oh my goodness, do I have time? And then I thought, as the conference passed me by and I wasn't there, I did have time.
Yes.
I would have loved to have gone, and I would love to have taken the time to explore around there, which I would.
Yeah.
And I just think, funnily enough, that there is a reset button for all of us. And I think that experience of being together and of listening, and the harmony and the coherence, there is something which I think we have found is missing when we're isolating, when we're just on these Zoom calls or mobile phones.
Absolutely.
It's much more limiting, and there is more to our life than that. And I know that on my Instagram, Mark, all the nature and the trees and the little moments of real life have actually spurred the Instagram growth far more than even Downton Abbey.
Yeah.
It's been so interesting. So the hawks, the birds, the owls,
Yes,
the butterflies,
yes.
the beautiful beech trees, the cedar trees, and in some ways that inspiration of the natural world, which goes into our poetry, which goes into the lyrics, which goes into the music,
Exactly.
creates the whole. This
I think
dance
you're
of
right.
life.
I think you're right. I think the one. I mean, I hesitate to talk about benefits of this terrible crisis, but the slowing down of our lives has given an opportunity to meditate, to think, to spend time in nature, to contemplate, and to listen to music, albeit maybe on recordings. But that's just whetted the appetite to start hearing it again live. And I think when you said about getting out of the big cities, one of the great things of going to a festival is you celebrate that place. And for the Newbury Festival, any visitor that comes here, they can go to so many. I mean, Hungerford, the church down there is absolutely wonderful. We go to Ramsbury. We go to these beautiful little villages and towns in the area, full of English charm and beauty, and not far from London. Not far from London.
I completely agree. I also think, if going to Hungerford, it's just also there's some nice restaurants.
Yes.
I think it's more of a bigger experience. Perhaps we can share it in different ways, Mark. I mean, I love Hungerford Common, walking across there, and there's also the antiques market.
But one of my favourite places is the Sheepdrove Centre at Lambourne. Now, this is something really special. Peter and Juliet Kindersley, when they retired from their publishing business, Dorling Kindersley, they famously poured all their money into their charitable trust and built an eco-conference centre, because they're passionate organic farmers and advocates of the environment. And this wonderful conference centre includes a fabulous oak room, which has got a glorious acoustic. And when I saw it first, I had already been on the jury of an international singing competition in one of the great vineyards in Bordeaux, and it goes every year to different vineyards.
That sounds great.
It was fantastic. It was fantastic. It inspired me going to all these wonderful vineyards in the Medoc each year to have the singing competition. I thought, actually, what Peter and Juliet have created in Lambourne is similar, and we could have a competition there, and they love the piano, for pianists. So 11 years ago, I said to Peter and Juliet, look, why don't we start a piano competition, and we can have they said, Mark, brilliant, what should we do? And I said, well, look, rather than opening it to anybody let's open it to every one of the colleges in the United Kingdom. And they do the preliminary rounds in all the colleges. We give a theme each year of a chosen composer. So this was in 2009, I think it began, where it was the Chopin anniversary. And so the first year, Chopin was the theme. I managed to get all the conservatoires from Glasgow, Manchester, Birmingham, Cardiff, and the 4 London colleges. They all did the preliminary rounds. And the great thing was, I said to the Kinderses, look, do you know that a lot of these competitions, the youngsters have to pay to enter and fund their own travel? I said, we're not going to do any of that. They said, Mark, absolutely not. All expenses will be covered, no entry fees. And I managed to get the most incredible members of the jury. And this has now been going for 11 years. And this is the one thing that is actually still happening this year. Because although we've had to postpone everything from May, in November, the 14th and 15th of November, we are doing the 2020 piano competition, because the jury can be isolated and the individual candidates, and we have, as you can tell, 8 colleges, each of them providing 2. So we have 16 candidates in the first day that the jury whittles down. They can all be socially isolated. We can wipe down the keys on the piano after each one. And if the audience is still reluctant, or if we're not allowed to bring audiences in for the final, we can Zoom it, or better than that, we can broadcast it with real professional video technology.
Mark, talk to Hannah and I. You don't have to do that. Your phone is fine.
So the thing is that we're still doing the piano competition, and I want to pay tribute to the Kinderses and also to celebrate that wonderful place, which is also a very important part of our festival map and identity.
Oh, it's brilliant, isn't it? Mark, thank you so much for joining me here today. It's been such a joy, actually, and clearly we have got some wonderful music to look forward to, and it'll be really good when it's back in our lives again.
Well, I still look forward to that, and thank you so much, Fiona. It's always lovely to see you.
Thank you so much.
And to
Mark.
be here.
Thank you. And the sun's come out, so it's
glorious,
perfect.
glorious.
Thank you. I hope you're enjoying my podcast as much as I'm enjoying making them. Do let your friends and family know about them. Subscribe. And if you're feeling generous, please leave a review. Thank you.